fear has a taste. For Taylor, it tasted like the mud splattered across her lips and the bitter cold of a Derbyshire rainstorm. She had run until her lungs burned, fleeing a marriage that was nothing more than a death sentence. She thought she had found the perfect hiding place, a dark, abandoned carriage house on the edge of the notorious Ashworth estate. She thought she was alone, safe in the shadows where no one could hurt her again. But she was wrong. Just as she closed her eyes, a voice drifted through the darkness, not angry, not shouting, but terrifyingly gentle. "You are trembling," the voice said, before she could even turn around. What happens when a runaway bride falls into the hands of England's most feared recluse? The answer will shatter everything you think you know about love and redemption. The year was 1884, and the sky over the moors of northern England looked like a bruise, purple, black, and swollen with rain. Taylor Vance did not look back. To look back was to see the ghost of the life she was leaving behind, and worse, the silhouette of the man who now claimed to own it. Her second cousin, Baron Thomas Hemsley. He was a man with a smile like a cracked porcelain plate, sharp, fake, and dangerous. Since her father's passing 3 months ago, Hemsley had dismantled Taylor's world piece by piece. First, the servants were let go. Then, the family silver vanished. Finally, this morning, he had informed her that she would marry him by week's end to consolidate the family assets. Taylor knew what that meant. It meant she would disappear, just as her mother's jewelry had. So she ran. She ran with nothing but the clothes on her back, a grey woolen dress that was now sodden and heavy as lead, and a small leather satchel containing her father's diary. The rain was torrential, a curtain of white noise that drowned out her own sobbing breaths. She had been walking for hours, her boots slipping on the slick heather. She needed shelter. If she stayed out here, the cold would kill her before Hemsley's hounds even caught her scent. Through the gloom, a structure loomed. It was not a cottage, but something grander, yet distinct from the main house that stood like a fortress on the hill. It was a carriage house, built of dark stone, its heavy wooden doors slightly ajar. Taylor slipped through the gap, the sudden silence of the interior hitting her like a physical blow. The air here was different, warmer, smelling of sweet hay, polished leather, and the earthy musk of horses. It was the scent of safety. She didn't dare go further in. Instead, she collapsed behind a stack of grain sacks near the entrance, pulling her knees to her chest. She was shivering so violently her teeth chattered, a sound that seemed deafening in the quiet. She squeezed her eyes shut, praying to a god she wasn't sure was listening anymore. She was drifting, the exhaustion pulling her under, when the sound of the heavy door creaking open snapped her eyes wide. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate boots striking the cobblestone floor. Taylor stopped breathing. She pressed a hand over her mouth, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Had Hemsley found her? Had he tracked her through the storm? The footsteps stopped. A match was struck, the sharp hiss followed by the flare of a lantern. The light swung, casting long, dancing shadows against the walls, illuminating the gleaming wheels of a black phaeton and the stalls beyond. "Easy, Titan," a voice murmured. Taylor froze. The voice was deep, resonating in the chest of the speaker, but it lacked the malice of the Baron. It was a baritone roughened by disuse, yet startlingly soft. She peeked through a gap in the sacks. A man stood with his back to her, attending to a massive black stallion in the first stall. He was tall, wearing a simple white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle, and dark breeches. He didn't look like a stable hand, his posture was too commanding, but he wasn't dressed like a lord. "The storm is rattling the roof again, isn't it?" the man said to the horse, stroking the animal's velvet nose. "It's all right. It's just noise. It cannot hurt you." He was comforting the beast. There was a tenderness in his touch that made Taylor's chest ache. She watched, mesmerized, as he checked the horse's hooves with practiced ease. She began to relax, inch by inch. She just needed him to leave. Once he was gone, she could sleep. She shifted her weight, preparing to settle back down. Snap! A dry twig, brought in on the sole of her boot, cracked beneath her shifting heel. The sound was microscopic, but in the cathedral-like silence of the carriage house, it sounded like a gunshot. The man at the stall went perfectly still. His hand paused on the horse's flank. He did not spin around. He did not shout. He simply lowered his hand and stood there, his head cocked slightly to the side. "Titan isn't the only one frightened of the thunder," the man said. His voice was no longer a murmur to a beast. It was projected, calm, and directed straight at the grain sacks. "You are breathing quite loudly," he added, his tone unhurried. "And based on the mud tracking near the door, you are soaked to the bone." Taylor couldn't move. Terror paralyzed her. "I have a pitchfork within reach," he continued, still not turning around. "But I have no desire to use it. However, if you intend to rob me, I suggest you leave now. If you intend to kill me, well, you'll have to get in line." He turned then, slowly. The lantern light caught his face, and Taylor gasped. It was Sebastian Thorne, the Duke of Ashworth. She knew him by reputation, though she had never seen him. The locals called him the Phantom of the Moors. Rumors said he was scarred, hideous, a monster who had killed his own brother in a duel and now lived in isolation. But the man standing there wasn't a monster. He was severe, yes. His face was comprised of sharp angles, a jaw that could cut glass, high cheekbones, and hair blacker than the night outside. But there was no disfigurement. There was only a cold, weary intensity in his grey eyes. He lifted the lantern higher, the light flooding her hiding spot. He saw her, huddled, drenched, trembling like a leaf. His eyes widened, just a fraction. The harshness in his face softened, replaced by a flicker of confusion. "You took refuge in the carriage house," he said, stating it as a fact. He took a step closer, and Taylor flinched, pressing her back against the rough stone wall. He stopped immediately. He raised his hands, palms open, showing he held no weapon. "I am not going to hurt you," he said. And then his voice dropped to that soft, rumbling register she had heard earlier. "But you cannot stay on the floor. The cold in these stones will stop your heart before morning." "Please," Taylor whispered, her voice cracking. "Please don't send me back." The Duke looked at her, really looked at her, taking in the desperation in her eyes and the bruised exhaustion under them. "I do not know where back is, miss," he said quietly, "but I rarely send anyone anywhere they do not wish to go." Sebastian Thorne, the 8th Duke of Ashworth, was not a man accustomed to surprises. His life was a regimented cycle of estate management, solitary rides, and avoiding the society that whispered his name with a mixture of awe and revulsion. He preferred horses to humans. Horses were honest, but the creature shivering behind his grain sacks was undeniably human and undeniably terrified. He watched her carefully. She was young, perhaps 22. Her grey dress was of good quality, but worn, and her hands, though muddy, were uncalloused. She was a lady, or at least she had been raised as one. "I cannot stand up," she admitted, her voice trembling. Sebastian didn't hesitate. He hooked the lantern on a nail and closed the distance between them. Before she could protest, he swept her up into his arms. She was shockingly light. She felt fragile, like a bird made of hollow bones. She stiffened against his chest, her wet clothes soaking instantly into his shirt. But she didn't fight him. She was too weak. "I am taking you to the tack room," he announced. "There is a stove there. It is warm." He carried her past the stalls, Titan snorting softly as they passed. The tack room was Sebastian's sanctuary within a sanctuary. It was where he repaired harnesses and read ledgers away from the prying eyes of his household staff. He kicked the door open and set her down gently on a velvet chaise longue he kept there, a piece of furniture far too elegant for a stable, but he enjoyed the contrast. Taylor curled into the cushions, her teeth still chattering. Sebastian moved efficiently. He stoked the cast-iron stove until the embers roared into flame. He pulled a heavy woolen horse blanket, clean and dry, from a shelf. "Remove the wet dress," he said, turning his back to her. I cannot," she stammered. "If you keep it on, you will catch pneumonia," he said, his voice flat but practical. "I will stand outside the door for 2 minutes. Wrap yourself in the blanket. When I knock, you answer. If you do not answer, I will assume you have fainted, and I will enter regardless." He stepped out into the corridor, closing the door with a solid thud. Taylor stared at the wood. Her fingers fumbled with the buttons of her bodice. She was stripping in the barn of a strange duke, a man rumored to be a killer. But the warmth radiating from the stove was seductive, and the cold was a physical pain. She peeled the sodden fabric from her skin, the air biting for a second before she wrapped the coarse, thick wool of the blanket around her. It smelled of cedar and horse, but it was dry. "Ready?" came the deep voice from the other side. "Yes," she whispered, though she doubted he heard it. He heard it. The door opened. Sebastian entered, carrying a tin mug. "I keep a kettle on the stove for tea, or brandy. This is mostly tea with a splash of the latter." He handed it to her. Their fingers brushed. His hand was large, warm and rough. Hers was ice cold. She drank greedily. The liquid burned her throat, then settled as a warm weight in her stomach. Color began to return to her cheeks. Sebastian pulled a wooden stool opposite her and sat down, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. He studied her with an intensity that made her want to hide, yet there was no leering in his gaze. It was analytical. "You are Taylor Vance," he said. Taylor nearly dropped the mug. "How?" "I know every family within a 30-mile radius of Ashworth," Sebastian replied. "Your father was Sir Julian Vance. He died 3 months ago. The estate passed to a cousin. Hemsley, I believe." "If you know who I am," she said, finding a shred of her courage, "then you know he is looking for me. And if you are going to turn me over to him, I beg you to just open the door and let me run into the storm. I would rather the rain take me than him." Sebastian was silent for a long moment. The firelight flickered in his grey eyes, casting shadows that made him look dangerous again. "Thomas Hemsley is a man who cheats at cards and kicks dogs," Sebastian said slowly. "I have banned him from my lands for 5 years. He leaned back, crossing his arms. "I do not like guests, Miss Vance. I value my solitude above all things, but I have a strict rule about not feeding prey to predators." "Then, you will let me stay?" "For tonight," he said. "But the storm will break by morning, and Hemsley will come knocking. He knows the geography. He knows this is the only shelter for miles." "I can hide," she said quickly. "I can work. I'm not useless. I can mend. I can transcribe. My father was a scholar. I helped him with his manuscripts." Sebastian looked at the blanket wrapped around her, then at the pile of wet clothes on the floor. He seemed to be weighing something, a calculation of risk and reward. My library is a disaster, he murmured, almost to himself. Decades of neglect. I have been meaning to catalogue it, but I lack the patience for dust. He looked her in the eye. Hemsley is a baron. I am a duke. He cannot enter my home without my permission, and he would not dare demand a search warrant against me. But if you stay, you disappear. You become a ghost. No one can know you are here. Not the servants, not the stable hands. Only me and Mrs. Higgins, my housekeeper, whom I trust with my life. Taylor stared at him. Why? Why would you do this for a stranger? Sebastian stood up, towering over her. He looked toward the door, where the rain was still hammering against the wood. Because, he said, his voice dropping to that soft, haunting tone again. I know what it is like to be hunted in your own home. The arrangement was struck. That night, Taylor did not sleep in the carriage house. Under the cover of the midnight darkness, Sebastian led her through a hidden servant's entrance into Ashworth Manor. The house was immense, a labyrinth of stone and shadow. It felt empty, stripped of the life and laughter that must have once filled it. Sebastian led her to the east wing, a section of the house that had been closed off for years. This was the nursery wing, once, he said, opening a door to a small, dusty, but comfortable room. No one comes here, not even the maids. I will bring you food. I will bring you fresh clothes. Mrs. Higgins will find something from the storage chests. And the library? Taylor asked, clutching the blanket tighter. Tomorrow, he said. Tonight, you sleep. And lock the door. He turned to leave, but paused at the threshold. Miss Vance. Yes, Your Grace? My name is Sebastian. If we are to be conspirators, Your Grace feels absurd. He closed the door before she could answer. The next morning, Taylor's life as a ghost began. Mrs. Higgins, a formidable woman with a face like a dried apple, but eyes that twinkled with kindness, arrived with a breakfast tray and a dress of dark blue wool. It was out of fashion, perhaps 20 years old, but the silk was fine. The Duke told me you were a stray cat he found in the rain, Mrs. Higgins said with a sniff, though she gently adjusted Taylor's collar. He has a habit of collecting broken things, but you're the first one that talks back. Taylor spent her days in the library. It was a cavernous, 2-story room, lined with books from floor to ceiling. It smelled of old paper and vanilla. It was a paradise, but it was also a prison. Sebastian joined her in the evenings. At first he sat at the far end of the long oak table, working on estate ledgers while she catalogued the history section. The silence between them was thick, filled with the scratching of quills and the ticking of the grandfather clock. But silence, Taylor learned, was a language Sebastian spoke fluently. On the third night, she found a book of poetry. Lord Byron. She was reading a passage softly to herself, unaware she was speaking aloud. Of cloudless climes and starry skies. Sebastian's voice finished the line from across the room. Taylor looked up, startled. He wasn't looking at her. He was staring into the fireplace. I didn't know you liked poetry, she said. I don't, he replied gruffly. I like structure. Poetry is chaos dressed in rhyme. Life is chaos, Taylor countered, emboldened by the safety of the room. Poetry just tries to make sense of it. Sebastian turned his chair to face her. The firelight caught the sharp angle of his cheekbone. And what sense can be made of a woman fleeing her family to hide in a dusty library with a recluse? The sense that she wishes to survive, Taylor said simply. Sebastian stood and walked toward her. He stopped at the table, his hand resting near her stack of books. I went into the village today, he said. His tone had shifted. It was serious. Taylor's breath hitched. And? Hemsley is there. He has posted flyers. He is offering a reward. £50 for information leading to your return. £50, Taylor whispered. That is a fortune to the villagers. It is, Sebastian agreed. But there is something else. He isn't just looking for you, Taylor. He is looking for something you took. Taylor's hand went instinctively to the pocket of her dress, where the small leather diary was hidden. Sebastian's eyes dropped to her hand, then back to her face. He didn't ask what it was. He didn't demand she hand it over. He was asking about a ledger, Sebastian said. A specific blue book. He claims you are mentally unstable, that you stole it in a fit of hysteria. He lies, Taylor said, her voice shaking with anger. He isn't looking for a ledger. He's looking for the truth. Which is? Taylor stood up. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small, battered book. She placed it on the table between them. My father didn't die of a heart failure, as Hemsley claims, she said, tears pricking her eyes. He was poisoned, slowly, over months, and Hemsley was the one mixing the tonic. My father figured it out too late. He wrote it all down in here. Sebastian stared at the book, his face hardened, the muscles in his jaw ticking. If Hemsley finds you, Sebastian said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper, he will kill you. I know, Taylor said. Sebastian reached out. For a moment, she thought he would take the book. Instead, his hand covered hers, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. It was an intimate, electric contact that made the air in the room vanish. Then he will have to go through me, Sebastian vowed, and I have been looking for a reason to destroy Thomas Hemsley for a very long time. Just then, a heavy pounding echoed through the silent house. It was the front door knocker. Bam! 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 Sebastian's head snapped toward the hall. Stay here, he ordered. Do not make a sound. He turned to leave, but he paused, looking back at her. The isolation in his eyes was gone, replaced by a fierce, protective fire. Trust me, Taylor. He vanished into the hallway. Taylor stood alone in the library, the diary burning beneath her palm as the muffled sound of voices drifted from the foyer. One was Sebastian's, calm, imperious. The other was high, sharp, and fake. It was Hemsley. He was inside the house. Taylor pressed her ear against the heavy oak door of the library, her breath held so tight her lungs ached. The voices from the foyer echoed off the marble floors, distorted, but decipherable. I know she is here, Thorne, Hemsley's voice sneered. It was a sound like oil sliding over gravel. My trackers found footprints leading to your carriage house, a woman's footprints. Unless you've taken to wearing ladies' boots for your midnight rides, you are harboring a fugitive. I harbor many things, Hemsley, Sebastian's voice replied, cool and detached. It was the voice of a man discussing the weather, not a kidnapping accusation. I harbor thoroughbreds. I harbor a disdain for uninvited guests, and I harbor a loaded pistol in the pocket of my smoking jacket. Would you like to see which one I produce first? There was a silence, a heavy, suffocating silence. You threaten a peer of the realm? Hemsley blustered, though his voice pitched higher. I threaten a trespasser, Sebastian corrected. You have no warrant. You have no constable. You have wet mud on my Persian rug. Get out. She is mentally unwell, Hemsley shouted, his composure cracking. She stole valuable family heirlooms. She is delusional. If you protect her, you are complicit in theft. I will bring the magistrate. I will drag your name through the papers again. Do you want that? Do you want them asking about that night in Paris again? Taylor froze. Paris? She knew the rumors of the duel, but she didn't know the details. Get out, Sebastian repeated. This time, the voice wasn't calm. It was a low growl, vibrating with a violence that made the wood of the library door tremble against Taylor's cheek. She heard the heavy scrape of the front door opening, the rush of wind and rain, and then a slam that rattled the windows in their frames. Silence returned to Ashworth Manor, but it was a jagged, nervous silence. Taylor backed away from the door as the handle turned. Sebastian entered. He looked composed, but his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. His face was pale, his eyes dark storms of their own. He didn't look at her. He walked straight to the sideboard and poured a glass of amber liquid, downing it in one swallow. "He is gone," Sebastian said, his back to her. "For now." "He mentioned Paris," Taylor said softly. She shouldn't have asked. She knew she shouldn't. But the words slipped out. Sebastian turned slowly. The vulnerability she had seen in the carriage house was gone, replaced by a defensive wall of ice. "He knows which levers to pull," Sebastian said. "He knows I value my privacy because I have sins to hide." "We all have sins." Taylor stepped closer, the firelight catching the gold threads in her dark blue dress. "But you protected me. A sinner would have handed me over for the £50. Sebastian looked at her then, really looked at her. He saw the trust in her eyes, a trust he hadn't earned, a trust that terrified him. "You don't know me, Taylor," he whispered. "You see a savior because you are desperate. But I am not a knight. I am a man who has spent 10 years pushing everyone away because—" He stopped, his jaw working. "Because why?" He sighed, a sound of infinite weariness. He reached up and unbuttoned the cuff of his left sleeve. Slowly, he rolled up the white linen. Taylor gasped softly. Running from his wrist all the way up his forearm was a thick, jagged scar. It wasn't a clean surgical cut. It was a burn, mottled and twisted, the skin puckered and white. "I didn't kill my brother in a duel," Sebastian said, his voice void of emotion. "We were in a fire in Paris, a hotel blaze. I tried to pull him out. The beam collapsed. I held on to his arm until I couldn't hold on anymore." He looked at the scar with hatred. "I didn't save him. I saved myself. That is the man you are trusting with your life." Taylor didn't flinch. She didn't look away in horror. Instead, she reached out. Her fingers, cool and soft, brushed against the jagged ruin of his arm. Sebastian stiffened, flinching as if she had burned him again. "Don't." "It is not a mark of shame," she whispered, tracing the edge of the scar. "It is a mark of love. You held on until the fire took him. You didn't let go, Sebastian. The fire forced you to." She looked up into his grey eyes. "Hemsley killed my father with poison and calls it a heart attack. You tried to save your brother from fire and call it a sin. Do you not see the difference?" Sebastian stared at her, his breath catching in his throat. For 10 years he had hidden this arm. He had hidden himself. And here was this woman, this fugitive in an oversized dress, touching his deepest wound and calling it love. The air between them shifted. The tension of the chase dissolved into a different kind of tension, something magnetic, pulling them toward the center of the room. Sebastian took a step closer. His hand, the scarred one, came up to cup her cheek. His thumb brushed her lip. "You should not be here," he murmured, his eyes dropping to her mouth. "You should be far away from a broken man like me." "I am exactly where I want to be," Taylor breathed. He leaned in. His breath was warm against her skin. The kiss was imminent, a promise hanging in the air. Crack. A stone shattered the library window, spraying glass across the floor. Sebastian shielded Taylor instantly, spinning her away from the debris. He looked toward the broken window, where the storm raged outside. Wrapped around the stone was a piece of paper. Sebastian marched over, crunching glass beneath his boots, and snatched up the note. He unfolded it. "What does it say?" Taylor asked, her heart hammering. Sebastian's face turned to granite. "It says the magistrate arrives at dawn. Hemsley has sworn an affidavit that you are being held against your will. They are coming to rescue you." He crumpled the paper in his fist. "We have run out of time." The clock on the mantelpiece struck 2. The library was colder now, the wind whistling through the broken pane. "You must leave," Taylor said, pacing the length of the rug. "If they find me here, they will arrest you for kidnapping. I will go. I will take a horse. I can make it to the coast." "You will not make it to the gate," Sebastian cut in sharply. "Hemsley has men watching the perimeter. If you step foot outside this house, you are his." "Then what do we do?" Taylor cried, turning to him. "I cannot let him destroy you, too." Sebastian stood by the fireplace, staring into the dying embers. He was silent for a long time. When he turned to face her, his expression was unreadable. "There is one way," he said. "One way to stop Hemsley. One way to make his warrant worthless and his affidavit a lie." "How?" "The law states that a husband has legal guardianship over his wife," Sebastian said, the words heavy and deliberate. "If you are Taylor Vance, a spinster, you are a ward of your cousin Hemsley. But if you are Taylor Thorne, Duchess of Ashworth, you are mine. And no magistrate in England can touch a duchess without the Duke's consent." Taylor stopped breathing. The room seemed to tilt. "Marriage?" she whispered. "It would be a marriage of protection," Sebastian said quickly, stepping forward. "A legal arrangement. You would have my name, my protection, and my fortune. Hemsley would be powerless. Once the danger has passed, we can live separate lives. You can have the townhouse in London. You can have whatever you wish." He was offering her safety. He was offering her a fortress. But he was also offering a wall between them. "And what do you get out of this arrangement, Your Grace?" Taylor asked, her voice trembling. "A scandal?" "I get to stop a monster," Sebastian said grimly. "And I get to know you are safe." Taylor looked at him. She saw the stoic mask he wore, but she also remembered the feel of his thumb on her lip, the heat of his body when he shielded her from the glass. He was proposing a business deal, but his eyes were begging for something else. "Dawn is in 4 hours," she said. "How can we marry by dawn?" "I have a special license," Sebastian said. "I obtained it years ago. For a disturbed reason I no longer care to entertain, and the village vicar owes me a favor. He will come if I call." He held out his hand, the scarred hand. "Taylor, will you marry me? Not for love, perhaps, but for life?" Taylor looked at his hand. She thought of her father's diary. She thought of Hemsley's cruel smile. And then she looked at Sebastian's face, the face of the man who had found her in the dark and brought her into the light. "Yes," she said. The next 3 hours were a blur of chaotic efficiency. Mrs. Higgins was woken up. The vicar, a terrified little man named Reverend O'Malley, was dragged from his bed and brought to the manor in the rain. There was no white dress. Taylor wore the dark blue wool. There were no flowers. There was only the firelight of the drawing room and the scent of old wood and rain. They stood before the fireplace. Sebastian's hand was warm and steady in hers. As they repeated the vows, the words felt heavy, ancient. Sebastian slid a ring onto her finger. It was not a delicate diamond. It was a heavy gold band with the Ashworth crest, a signet ring he had pulled from his own pinky finger. It was too big. It hung loose on her finger. "I pronounce you man and wife," the Reverend squeaked. Sebastian didn't kiss her. He simply squeezed her hand hard. "Let them come," he whispered. And come they did. At 6 a.m., the heavy doors of Ashworth Manor were thrown open. But it wasn't Sebastian who opened them. It was the butler, flanked by 2 footmen. Hemsley strode in, followed by a confused-looking magistrate and 3 constables. "Search the house," Hemsley barked. "She is in the library. I saw her." "You will do no such thing," a voice boomed from the top of the grand staircase. They all looked up. Sebastian stood on the landing, dressed in impeccable morning blacks, and beside him, her hand resting on his arm, stood Taylor. Her head was high, her eyes cold steel. "There is no Taylor Vance here," Sebastian declared, his voice echoing through the hall. "Don't play games, Thorne," Hemsley shouted, pointing a shaking finger. "She's right there. Arrest her. She is a fugitive." "She is my wife," Sebastian said calmly. The silence that followed was absolute. The magistrate dropped his hat. Hemsley's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "I beg your pardon, Your Grace," the magistrate stammered. "Her Grace, the Duchess of Ashworth," Sebastian corrected, descending the stairs slowly, Taylor matching his pace. "We were married this morning. Reverend O'Malley presided. The papers are signed and witnessed." They reached the bottom of the stairs. Sebastian stepped toe to toe with Hemsley. He towered over the Baron. "You have no authority over my wife, Hemsley. You have no claim to her property. And if you ever step foot on my land again, I will not send you away with a warning. I will shoot you for trespassing." Hemsley looked at Taylor. He saw the ring on her finger. He saw the defiance in her eyes. "You think you've won," Hemsley hissed, low enough that the magistrate couldn't hear. "But you've just tied yourself to a sinking ship, cousin. Did you tell him? Did you tell the Duke about the other thing your father wrote in that diary?" Taylor's blood ran cold. "Leave," Sebastian ordered. Hemsley sneered. He tipped his hat mockingly. "Enjoy the honeymoon. I'll be waiting for the fallout." He spun on his heel and marched out. The magistrate, apologizing profusely, followed. The heavy doors closed, shutting out the rain and the threat. But inside, the air was not clear. Sebastian turned to Taylor. He didn't look triumphant. He looked at her with a new, sharp suspicion. "What did he mean?" Sebastian asked quietly. "What else is in the diary?" The victory was short-lived. The relief of the morning dissolved into a tense, fragile afternoon. Taylor walked to the window of the drawing room, twisting the heavy gold ring on her finger. "I don't know what he meant," she said, her voice sounding thin to her own ears. "The diary details the poisoning. It details the financial ruin Hemsley orchestrated. That is all." "Hemsley is a gambler," Sebastian said, pouring himself another drink. He had been drinking steadily since the wedding, not enough to be drunk, but enough to dull the edge of his adrenaline. "He doesn't bluff unless he has an ace up his sleeve." He looked amused, Taylor. Not defeated. Amused. "Perhaps he is just trying to sow discord between us," Taylor suggested. "He knows our marriage is unconventional." "Our marriage is a fortress built on sand," Sebastian muttered. He walked over to her. The distance between them was strange now. They were married, yet they had never been more like strangers. The intimacy of the library was gone, replaced by the awkward weight of their new titles. "I need to see the diary," Sebastian said. "It is in the library," Taylor said, "in the top drawer of the desk." Sebastian nodded and left the room. Taylor stood alone, a terrible feeling of dread coiling in her stomach. Had she missed something? She had read her father's frantic, shaky handwriting a dozen times. It was a catalogue of symptoms, a list of assets sold. Suddenly, a crash echoed from the library, the sound of wood splintering. Taylor ran. She hiked up her skirts and sprinted down the hallway. She burst into the library. Sebastian was standing by the desk. The diary was open in his hands, but the desk drawer was smashed on the floor. His face was ashen. He looked as if he had been struck physically. "Sebastian," Taylor whispered. He looked up. His eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of horror and betrayal. "You knew," he rasped. "Knew what?" "You knew who your father was working for before he died." "He was a scholar," Taylor said, confused. "He worked for the Historical Society." "He worked for the Crown," Sebastian corrected, his voice rising to a shout. "He wasn't just cataloguing history, Taylor. He was investigating treason." Sebastian threw the diary onto the desk. It landed open on the last page, a page Taylor had never reached because the pages were stuck together with what she thought was water damage. Sebastian had pried them apart. "Read it," he commanded. Taylor walked forward, her hands shaking. She looked at the last entry, dated 2 days before her father's death. Taylor gasped. "The architect is the Duke of Ashworth." "No," she whispered. "That's impossible. You are a recluse. You don't leave the estate." "My father did," Sebastian said, his voice dead. "The 7th Duke. My father died 4 years ago. This entry implies he was a traitor." "But it says the Duke," Taylor said. "It doesn't specify which one." "The date," Sebastian pointed. 1880. My father was alive then, but I was handling the accounts. I was the one signing the checks. He looked at her, his eyes wild. "Hemsley knows. He knows this diary implicates the Ashworth title in treason. That is why he wanted it. Not to hide his own theft, but to destroy me. He let you keep it. He let you bring it here." Sebastian laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "It was a trap. He wanted the diary in my house. If the authorities find this book in my possession, with my name on the accounts, I will hang for treason." Taylor grabbed the book. "Then we burn it. We burn it right now." She moved toward the fireplace. "No!" Sebastian roared, grabbing her wrist. "Why not?" she cried. "It is the only evidence." "Because—" A new voice spoke from the doorway. They both spun around. Standing in the frame of the library door was not Mrs. Higgins. It was a man in a dark suit holding a revolver, and behind him, smiling that cracked plate smile, was Thomas Hemsley. "Because," Hemsley purred, stepping into the room, "I have already informed Scotland Yard that the Duke of Ashworth is in possession of seditious materials. They are on their way. If you burn it, you are destroying evidence. If you keep it, you are guilty." Hemsley looked at Sebastian, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "You thought you could outsmart me with a wedding ring, cousin? I didn't want Taylor back. I wanted her to bring the bomb into your house, and she did. Beautifully." Sebastian pushed Taylor behind him, shielding her with his body. He stared down the barrel of the gunman's pistol. "You are trespassing," Sebastian said, his voice low and dangerous. "I am a concerned citizen, making a citizen's arrest until the police arrive," Hemsley said. He looked at Taylor, peeking from behind Sebastian's shoulder. "You see, my dear, you didn't find a refuge. You found a grave, and you dug it for him yourself." The silence in the library was broken only by the crackle of the dying fire and the ragged breathing of the 4 people standing in the room. Hemsley looked at the grandfather clock. "The inspector will be here in 10 minutes, just enough time for me to stage the scene. A struggle over the weapon, the traitorous Duke resisting arrest, a tragic accident." He nodded to the gunman, a burly man with a scar across his nose. "Kill him." "Wait!" Taylor screamed, stepping in front of Sebastian again. The barrel of the gun was leveled directly at her chest. "Taylor, move!" Sebastian growled, his hands gripping her shoulders to pull her back. "No," she said, her voice shaking, but her feet planted firm. She looked at Hemsley. "You missed something. You are so arrogant, Thomas, that you missed the one detail that hangs you." Hemsley laughed, though his eyes flickered to the diary on the desk. "I missed nothing. The book says the Duke financed the separatists. That is all the police need. Read the date, Taylor said, pointing to the open page without looking away from her cousin. Read the date of the transfer. Hemsley frowned. March 14th, 1880. So what? March 14th, 1880, Sebastian repeated, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. He looked at Taylor, understanding dawning in his grey eyes. Where were you on March 14th, 1880, Sebastian? Taylor asked, her voice ringing clear in the room. Sebastian turned his gaze to Hemsley, a cold, predatory smile slowly curving his lips. I was in the Hotel L'Impératrice in Paris, lying in a burn ward, unconscious, with doctors peeling the linen from my arm. Hemsley's smile faltered. And my father, Sebastian continued, his voice dropping an octave, becoming the terrified rumble of the storm itself. My father was in London, addressing the House of Lords. The minutes of the session are public record. Neither of the Dukes of Ashworth were at the estate to sign that transfer. Sebastian took a step forward, ignoring the gun. But you were, Thomas. You were the steward then. You held the keys. You held the seal. It doesn't matter, Hemsley shrieked, his composure shattering. The police don't know that. They will see the diary. They will see a dead traitor, and they will believe me. Shoot him, Hemsley commanded the gunman. Shoot him now. The gunman hesitated. He had been hired to intimidate a recluse, not assassinate a peer of the realm with a convoluted alibi. I said shoot! Hemsley lunged for the gun himself. In that split second of chaos, Sebastian moved. He didn't move like a nobleman. He moved like the animal he had been rumored to be. He shoved Taylor violently to the side, sending her crashing into the velvet armchair, safe from the line of fire. Bang! The gun went off. The bullet shattered a bust of Julius Caesar on the mantel, sending marble dust spraying into the air. Sebastian collided with the gunman. They crashed into the heavy oak table, sending the diary and the lamp flying. The room plunged into semi-darkness, lit only by the fireplace. Get the book, Hemsley yelled, scrambling on the floor toward the leather-bound diary. Burn it! Taylor saw Hemsley crawling toward the fireplace, the diary in his hand. If that book touched the flames, the proof of Hemsley's forgery and Sebastian's innocence would be gone forever. She didn't think. She didn't scream. She grabbed the heavy brass poker from the fireplace stand. As Hemsley reached for the flames, Taylor swung the poker with all the strength of a woman who had been running for too long. Crack! The brass struck Hemsley's wrist. He howled in pain, dropping the diary just inches from the grate. Taylor dove for it. Her fingers closed around the cool leather, just as Hemsley kicked out, his boot connecting with her ribs. She gasped, the air leaving her lungs, but she curled around the book, tucking it under her body. Give it to me, you witch! Hemsley snarled, grabbing her hair. Across the room, a brutal struggle was ending. The gunman, realizing he was outmatched by the sheer fury of the Duke, had tried to draw a knife. Sebastian had caught his wrist, twisted it with a sickening pop, and driven the man's head into the floorboards. The gunman lay still. Sebastian turned, his chest heaving, blood trickling from a cut on his brow. He saw Hemsley standing over Taylor, his hand raised to strike her again. A sound tore from Sebastian's throat, a roar that wasn't human. He crossed the room in 2 strides. He didn't punch Hemsley. He grabbed him by the throat, lifted him off his feet, and slammed him against the bookshelf. Books rained down around them. You touched her, Sebastian whispered, his face inches from Hemsley's purpling face. You touched my wife. Hemsley clawed at Sebastian's iron grip, his eyes bulging. Please, Hemsley choked out. I should kill you, Sebastian said, his thumb pressing into Hemsley's carotid artery. The world would be cleaner. Sebastian! Taylor's voice cut through the red haze of his rage. She was sitting up, clutching the diary to her chest, her hair wild and her face pale. "Don't," she wept. "Don't let him turn you into the monster he says you are. You are not him." Sebastian froze. He looked at Hemsley, weak, pathetic, gasping for air. Then he looked at Taylor, strong, beautiful, and the keeper of his soul. He released his grip. Hemsley crumpled to the floor, gasping and coughing. Sebastian stepped back, straightening his jacket with trembling hands. He walked over to Taylor and knelt, ignoring the blood on his face. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice breaking. "I'm fine," she whispered, handing him the diary. "We have it. We have the truth." Outside, the sound of police whistles cut through the rain. The heavy thud of the front door knocker echoed through the house. "Open up, Scotland Yard!" Sebastian took the diary. He stood up, pulled Taylor to her feet, and wrapped his arm, the scarred arm, the strong arm, around her waist. "Let them in," Sebastian said. The following hour was a whirlwind of bureaucracy and revelation. Inspector Grayson, a stern man with a moustache that twitched when he was annoyed, listened in silence. He looked at the bruised gunman in handcuffs. He looked at Hemsley, who was nursing a broken wrist and refusing to speak. And he looked at the diary. Sebastian stood by the fireplace, Taylor seated in the armchair beside him. He did not let go of her hand. "The dates align, Your Grace," Inspector Grayson finally said, closing the diary. "We have records of the fire in Paris, and we have records of your father's attendance in Parliament. It would have been physically impossible for either of you to sign for this gold shipment." He turned to Hemsley. "Baron Hemsley, you are under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and the attempted murder of a peer of the realm." Hemsley looked up. His arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow, hateful stare. "She isn't who you think she is," Hemsley spat, looking at Taylor. "She's a manipulator. She played us both." "She is the Duchess of Ashworth," Sebastian said coldly, "and she is the only reason you are leaving this house in handcuffs and not in a pine box. Take him away." As the constables dragged Hemsley out, the rain outside finally began to stop. The storm had broken. The inspector tipped his hat. "I will need a formal statement tomorrow, Your Grace. But for tonight, I suggest you attend to your wife. She has had a frightful ordeal." When the door finally closed, leaving them alone in the wrecked library, the silence was different. It wasn't the silence of fear or the silence of secrets. It was the silence of a vacuum, a sudden, stunning peace. Taylor tried to stand, but her legs gave way. The adrenaline had crashed. Sebastian caught her instantly. He didn't say a word. He simply scooped her up into his arms, just as he had done that first night in the carriage house. He carried her out of the library, up the grand staircase, and past the dusty guest rooms. He didn't take her to the nursery wing. He kicked open the double doors at the end of the hall, the master suite. The room was vast, dominated by a four-poster bed and a roaring fire that had been kept lit by the staff. He laid her gently on the bedspread. He sat on the edge, his shoulders slumping. He looked at his hands, one clean, one scarred. "I am sorry," he said, his voice rough. Taylor reached out and took his scarred hand. "For what?" "For bringing this violence to you. You came here for safety, and I gave you a gunfight." "You gave me a life," Taylor corrected him. She sat up, wincing slightly from her bruised ribs, and placed her hand on his cheek. "You gave me a name that protected me. You stood in front of a bullet for me." "I am a difficult man, Taylor," Sebastian said, searching her eyes. "I am moody. I am scarred. I prefer horses to people. This marriage, it was a legal trick. You are not bound to it. I can petition for an annulment. You can be free." Taylor looked at him. She saw the fear in his eyes, not fear of Hemsley, but fear of rejection. The phantom of the moors was terrified that the beauty would leave now that the beast was slain. "I do not want an annulment," she said softly. Sebastian went still. "You don't?" "I told you in the library," she said, leaning in until their foreheads touched. "I am exactly where I want to be. I don't want the townhouse in London. I don't want separate lives. I want the storm, Sebastian, as long as you are the one holding the umbrella." Sebastian let out a breath that sounded like a sob. He closed his eyes and leaned into her touch. "Then you shall have it," he whispered. He kissed her then. It wasn't the chaste, legal kiss of the wedding ceremony. It was a kiss of desperate relief, of passion ignited by danger, of two lonely souls finally colliding. It tasted of brandy and rain and blood, and it was the sweetest thing Taylor had ever known. The spring air over Derbyshire was sweet, smelling of heather and blooming wildflowers. The dark, bruising clouds of winter were a distant memory, replaced by a pale, watery blue sky. Taylor stood in the doorway of the carriage house, watching the scene inside. The carriage house was no longer a place of refuge for runaways. It was working efficiently. Grooms moved back and forth with saddles and brushes. In the center stall, Sebastian was grooming Titan. He was wearing his shirt sleeves again, the linen rolled up past his elbows. The scar on his arm was visible, white against his tanned skin. He no longer hid it. He was talking to the horse, a low murmur of affection. "You are spoiling him," Taylor called out, stepping into the light. Sebastian turned. The harsh angles of his face had softened over the months. He looked younger, the weight of the treasonous secret lifted from his shoulders. "He deserves spoiling," Sebastian said, patting the horse's flank. "He kept my secrets for years. Didn't you, boy?" He walked over to Taylor, wiping his hands on a rack. He looked at her with a reverence that still made her blush. She was wearing a dress of pale green muslin, and her hand rested absent-mindedly on her stomach, which was just beginning to show the faintest curve of new life. "Hemsley's trial concluded today," Sebastian said, his voice turning serious. "And? Guilty on all counts. He will be transported to the colonies. He will never set foot in England again." Taylor let out a long breath. "It is truly over then." "The past is over," Sebastian agreed. He reached out and took her hand, bringing her knuckles to his lips. "But I believe we have quite a bit of future to attend to." He led her out of the carriage house, into the sunlight of the courtyard. They walked toward the manor, not as a duke and a fugitive, but as a husband and wife. Taylor looked back once at the carriage house. It was just a building of stone and wood. But to her, it was a cathedral. It was where she had fallen, and where she had been caught. "What are you thinking?" Sebastian asked. Taylor smiled, squeezing his hand. "I was just thinking," she said, "that I am very glad I chose this door to hide behind." Sebastian stopped. He pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "So am I, my love. So am I." Above them, the sun broke fully through the clouds, bathing the Ashworth estate in gold. The shadows were gone. And so, the storm finally cleared over Ashworth Manor. Taylor and Sebastian proved that even the deepest scars can heal if touched by the right hand, and that love is sometimes found in the darkest of places, even behind a stack of grain sacks in a rainy carriage house. I hope you enjoyed this journey of mystery, danger, and romance. It was a long road from that first terrifying night to the sunlight of the epilogue, but Taylor and Sebastian made it through together. If this story touched your heart, please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more full-length novels like this one. Share this video with a friend who needs a little romance in their day, And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Thank you for listening.